All right, here we are, chapter 38. We're in the first heading, formation of a bipolar world, and we're talking about the Cold War in Europe as the first subheading here. So one of the things that's important to note is we have an iron curtain that's descended across Europe. So we have basically Western Europe and the United States wanting democratic capitalism, and on Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, we're wanting communism. So we have these two great superpowers, and we have uh, Europe divided up. And one of the places where those divisions are most difficult is going to be in Germany. So what's going to happen is what is going to happen is that Germany is such an important piece to Europe that the Soviet Union, United States, France, and England are going to get together and they're going to decide to split it up into quadrants, into four different pieces. Berlin is such an important world city. They do the same thing to Berlin and split it up into four categories. Now, what will happen is that the United States and Western Europe want to have a strong Germany available to kind of stand up against the potential Soviets, and the Soviets want a fractured Germany, so they don't have to worry about this powerful country invading them again. So what ends up happening is the Soviet Union is very upset when the Democratic Republic, the U.S., Britain, French parts of Germany turn into West Germany, and those parts of Berlin switch into West Berlin. That gets them so upset that the Soviet Union creates a blockade, prevents Western Berlin for West Berlin from getting supplies. And so when they do that, the United States and the United Kingdom and France have a question: do we go to war? And they say, well, at first, we'll talk about why they didn't want to do war in a second. But what they decided to do is they decided to do an airlift. So what's going to happen is that for like 11 months, there's going to be these constant airlifts, these constant drop of supplies into West Berlin, and sometimes around the clock, and sometimes right after each other, just so that the Soviets couldn't stop it. So after about a year, what ends up happening is that the Soviets relent and let normal supplies come in, because they realize that the United Kingdom and the United States are going to do this as long as it takes. So we have a strong West Germany, whose capital is in Bonn, and then we have a weaker East Germany, which has its headquarters in East Berlin. As you can see, Berlin here is in the midst of deep within the East German territory, so that's how the Soviets were able to do a blockade here. The other issue with Berlin is that being split between West and East, it's going to be a very easy it's going to be a very easy way to defect. And nearly 3.5 million East Germans are going to defect, especially those who are young and the best and the brightest. They're going to want to be in a place where their skills will allow them to live better lives. And so it's incredibly embarrassing, obviously, for the Soviets. And so they create the Berlin Wall. This monstrous, you can see it down here, this monstrous wall, barbed wire, concrete, and little machine gun nests to prevent people from going from East Berlin to West Berlin. So, so why didn't they go to war? Why didn't they immediately say, "Hey"? Because again, a blockade, if you cut off someone's supplies, you're doing an act of war. You're trying to starve or kill the people there. So what happens is that the reason why is if you ever go to war, where it's a real war, where both sides are at risk of being decimated, you eventually will use your biggest and best weapons. And that would include, at this point, nuclear bombs, which just don't have, which have such a huge destructive capacity. So the world is not just split up between like kind of this Iron Curtain, but we have these military blocks: NATO for the Western Europe and the United States, and the Warsaw Pact for Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. And if you attack any of those, so part of that is if you attack any of those countries, then you're attacking all of them, and then we have war. And we have that on either side to kind of balance it out. The other thing that happens is these thermonuclear weapons are going to be incredibly destructive. And although it's not going to be until the 60s that the Soviets are eventually going to reach parity, um, but at that point, we have this kind of like really sensitive balancing act happening. By the 1960s, we had so many nuclear weapons that if either side were to shoot a missile, they might as well fire it on themselves, because as soon as one missile is shot, the other side was going to shoot missiles, and then more and more and more and more. And by the 60s, we were already at the point where basically both sides would be decimated. Within another decade or so, we would have enough to decimate the entire planet. And so this is going to, so whereas it's one of these things with peace through strength, is the people, like, again, why do we have this huge military industrial complex right now? Is we're trying to say, look, the reason why things are peaceful is because we have the biggest and baddest weapons, and they know they can attack us without being decimated. So that is called MAD, or mutually assured destruction. And as someone who lived through it, it's not very much fun, but fortunately, we are not going to have any time where we have a direct war between the Soviet Union and the United States, and especially not a nuclear one.